Hi, welcome to our video presentation today. The focus of our video today is going to be on identification testing. The last video we covered identification testing and some of the general requirements required when considering starting or manufacturing a dietary supplement ingredient. Now, for all dietary supplement manufacturing or holding, as I said in the last video, that requires that you identify all of the raw material ingredients that goes into your final supplement product. And so that is covered under part 111.70 of the good manufacturing or current good manufacturing practices for dietary supplements manufacturing, holding, distribution of final products. And so today we want to focus on what are some of the things that you need to do for step one. That is, I'm going to start manufacturing a product. Well, one of the things we discussed was that you need to, at a minimum, perform at least one identification test. And that's a requirement. That's not something that is made up. That's a requirement. And so if you're in the process, then you need to have, as part of your process, identifying the components of your final product. And in doing so, it means that you have to start with identifying the starting materials. And your starting materials are normally of two types: your active ingredients and what we call excipients. So active ingredients would actually be the products or the ingredient or the substance or the chemical or the compound of interest as to where the label claim is made. So for instance, if you're manufacturing vitamin C, then your active ingredient is vitamin C. But you may also have, as part of that formulation, excipients. That is some fillers, some other powders, microcrystalline cellulose. You're not making a label claim about how much of those are in your finished product, but they're also part of the formulation. And so, but you have to test everything. And so the regulation states that every component should be tested. Every component should at least be identified before you start that batching or blending that would give you your finished product. And so if we continue with the example of your ascorbic acid or vitamin C, then you need to perform at least one test. Based on the regulations, you need to perform at least one identifying test on vitamin C to ensure that you actually have vitamin C. Now, if you do not do that, then the question is, how do you know for certain that you actually have vitamin C in the finished product that you have? You should not take the word of your manufacturer. You should not take the word of your supplier. You need to have actual documentation that says that this product was tested. Once you imported that product, before you began the actual manufacturing process, you need some identification that shows that this product, that this compound is actually the very specific compound that you're saying it is. That also goes to the excipients, because you need to determine if the excipients are actually what you say they are. And so it is important to actually have documentation to show that these tests were performed. And of course, if you do not have a laboratory to perform these tests, then I highly recommend, and I'm biased because we own Culinary Analyticals, so we would highly recommend that you utilize Culinary Analyticals for your laboratory testing as an independent third-party laboratory. Now, what are some of the tests that you can do to verify and identify your starting material? Now, first of all, you have to select the test that you need to perform. All right. So you need to select the test that needs to be performed. And so you have to then figure out what test is required, what test is appropriate for my raw material. And the United States Pharmacopoeia actually provides some good guidelines and suggested tests that you can perform for a great number of the raw material, excipients, and active ingredients that are now available for dietary supplements. So that would be my first recommendation, that you engage the United States Pharmacopoeia, maybe the most recent one you can find, and see what are the tests that are recommended for your particular ingredient. Now, the challenge that you're going to find, especially in the supplement space, is that you may be working with a relatively new product or a relatively new ingredient that has not been vetted, and so those tests may not yet be available in the United States Pharmacopoeia. Now, again, in a case like that, you may need to get with a lab that may be able to suggest an appropriate test for you to move forward. Either way, you have to find a way to perform an identifying test. Now, the test that you select is going to depend, one, on your budget, and it's also going to be determined by the type of test that may be appropriate. So for example, if you're working with botanical or herbal extracts, then an appropriate test method might be that you use thin layer chromatography, or we normally shorten that to say TLC, or HPTLC, or high performance thin layer chromatography. Those would be appropriate tests to perform to figure out if your herbal product is actually what it says it is. So for instance, let's say you're making a product that contains ginger as part of your formulation. Then you may want to perform an HPTLC or a thin layer chromatography that would allow you to identify the components or the ingredients or the active compounds in ginger. And so that now you have that documentation, you now have a report that says, yes, I have ginger in my finished formulation, and that would be your evidence that you did perform that test. And again, there are a variety of tests you can perform. The USP would have several recommendations, so I'm just giving an example that may be one of the tests you may perform. If you're not working with a botanical extract, or let's say it's an amino acid, maybe it's L-glutamine or L-tryptophan. Again, you can also do a TLC test, but you may also want to do an FTIR test. Or again, I go back to the United States Pharmacopoeia, normally have recommendations as to what suggested tests you can perform. And sometimes the tests are a simple, what we call wet chemistry test. That is, they don't require any instrumentation, they don't require any equipment. They just require a particular color change or observation of a particular type of chemical reaction, and that may be sufficient for that identification test. The overriding factor, the overriding thing you want when it comes to this part of it is that you have to have documentation showing that something was done, some particular test was done to give you confidence that you fulfill that first part of the requirement. And again, we are biased because we own Culinary Analyticals. We definitely recommend that you go to our website or you give us a call if you're not sure about your testing, and we'll be happy to walk you through some of the tests that you can perform. So, in summary, one, you have to perform testing on your raw material ingredients, both the active ingredients and the excipients. So you need to perform testing on those. If you're not certain of what tests you can do, then again, maybe you need to have a consultant that you want to work with. And again, I'm going to be biased, but you can always call us at DS Nutria Consulting, and we'll be happy to work with you in walking you through what are some of the tests you can set up and give you details as to how you go about selecting the appropriate test that you may want your laboratory to perform. So again, you can always go to dsneutral.com and contact us there, and we can guide you through. And you may not have to use our lab, you may not want to use our lab, but we can independently help you determine the appropriate test that you can use. And trust me, regardless of the lab that you go to, if you're dealing with a good lab, they're going to recommend an appropriate test. So again, you do not have to use our laboratory for that, but they would recommend, wouldn't be give you some suggestions, I would say. Let me backtrack on that. Not that they would recommend, but they probably would give you some suggestions, because it is your responsibility to inform the laboratory as to what type of test you want done, and it's your responsibility to understand what your specifications are for the test that you may want done. So it's not the lab's responsibility, it's your responsibility. So again, if you need some help with those, we are always ready and able to give you some guidance in that particular aspect. So, quick review. 1, you do need to have testing done on your excipients and your active material. 2, you need to choose the appropriate test to perform on your active material, active ingredient, and your excipient. 3, the United States Pharmacopoeia would be a good place to start to find out some of the tests that the identification tests that may need to be done for you to begin your process of manufacturing your product. All right, I hope this information was helpful. And if you need more guidance, if you need a lab to work with, please feel free to go to culinaricanalyticals.com and call us, and we'll be happy to work with you. If you're looking for more in-depth information and consultations, feel free to go to dsneutral.com, and I'll be happy to work with you and walk you through step by step how to set up your specifications and what are some of the tests that I would recommend for your particular product. All right, have a good day. See you on the next video.